Wicket knows the way. Marla let herself into Morgan's market before dawn, the sky not yet decided on grey or black. She had the same order every morning, the same motions that slid into each other without thinking. Key in the back door lock, shoulder against it to unstick the swell, alarm code tapped in with the familiarity of knuckles finding their own bones. She did not say the numbers aloud. Lights next, banks of fluorescent bars flaring awake one by one with that dry insect buzz, aisle by aisle, the store revealing itself like a face coming back from anesthesia. Tills after that, drawers lifted with knuckly clacks, paper rolls checked, coins counted by feel more than sight. Coffee started, burnt smell pushing out the colder metal smells of refrigeration and mop water and pallet wrap. She liked the quiet hour when the market was hers, a place of faint hums and settled shadows, waiting for customers to knock it all loose. She had claimed the corkboard by the bathrooms out of habit. No one assigned it. She just found herself trimming ragged edges, peeling off staples, rubbing away the gummy half-moons from old tape. It had been a shabby patchwork of guitar lessons and babysitting hours, yard sales and church suppers, and a weekly cribbage night. After a while, you learned the handwriting of the town. You could tell who printed careful letters to look respectable and who scrawled in a rush that carried a smell of panic. You learned, too, which messages lingered long and which died quick. There was a rhythm to a place, and Marla liked sitting near its beat. The board started acting wrong on a Monday that had promised rain and then thought better of it. She noticed because her thumbs smarted where a tack didn't go in, but spat out with little spite. Someone had left a folded sheet on the counter at the end of her shift, with a note asking if you get a chance, please post thanks, and a drawn smile that looked like a staple tugged crooked on paper. Yard sale, the text said. A neat photo of a folding table, quilts, a blender in a box, a glass lamp with a brass neck. She took 2 tacks, tried to pin the corners in the space between last week's babysitting schedule and a faded poster for a junior softball sign-up. The tack slid sideways, bending as if it had run into something solid under the cork. She moved down a thumb's width and tried again. The point went in half and then decided not to belong there, popping back out in a little jump that made her swear softly. The second tack did the same. She thought of plywood behind, of a screw head in just that spot, of someone pasting over a knot of wood and calling it good. She moved down farther and the tack wouldn't even bite. It was like pressing into rubber. She taped it instead. The tape caught for a breath and then peeled off in a slow, tired curl. She smoothed the edge with the side of her fist and stepped back. When she looked again after refilling the napkin dispenser by the coffee urns, the yard sale sign lay on the floor, tape curled like fish skin. Marla put it back, pried the tack with the edge of a spoon, tried again. The board would not take it. It happened again with a babysitting flyer, a half page with tear-off phone strips cut with the indifferent snips of kitchen scissors. The tack bent until it resembled a crooked knee. When she glanced at the board, the photo of a missing calico cat remained perfectly in place. Lost, it said, bold. Daisy, answers to Daisy, last seen in the alley by the laundromat, a smudged phone number that you could call even though half the digits were ghosted. Marla didn't remember pinning that one herself, but the thing had posted itself wherever it liked. She tried experiments because that was her way. News of a church supper slid off like a fried egg off a new pan. Someone offering lawn mowing couldn't stick it. Another lost cat notice went right in. So did a black and white photocopy of a beagle with a shaved patch on its belly and a sullen look around the eyes. Lost ferret, lost parakeet with a choke chain of exclamation points, all bit with a sound more felt than heard, like a crust breaking under a knife. She stood very still and listened, and thought she could hear a faint, grainy gulp, as if the cork had taken a mouthful and was working it down. When she told the manager, he made a face that meant he was doing the thing of being reasonable. He was good at that face. Humidity, he said, pointing vaguely toward the ceiling where the ductwork ran behind so many tiles that had gone tea-brown at the corners. This time of year the Cork swells. Give it a week till the HVAC guy comes. Meanwhile, maybe pets only. He smiled in a way that asked her to find it funny. Pets only till HVAC, he said, and wrote it on a receipt. She took that receipt, looked at the glossy print of the register name across the top, and taped it under the header. That stayed, though the tape did a little sigh as she pressed it. By midweek, the whole board was eyes and collars and phone numbers that now seemed unimportant compared to the photo itself. The glossy coat, the wet shine in a dog's pupil that reflected the person taking the picture. Marla recognized a lot of the animals. She had bagged their food, sold their leashes, watched them wait in pickups with noses afloat in a river of smells. She had watched their owners put a hand on the top of a head absent-mindedly, the way you touch a banister without thinking about falling. The market began to smell like an animal shelter. Not a bad smell, not filth, but a dampness, a wet coat smell that sat down at the back of your tongue and wouldn't move. The entry mat, that plastic tooth slab you could brush your soles against, got a faint musk. Customers noticed and pretended not to, eyes going to the ceiling ducts like the manager had. The dairy case picked up a new tone in its hum, something just a notch higher that slid under your skin if you stood there too long. Marla found herself rubbing at her arms as if she'd walked into cold. Dogs began to gather outside the sliding doors before opening. They stood or sat with their tails held in an alert way, not wagging, but set as if bracing against a wind you couldn't feel. Their backs showed burrs stitched along the spine, as if someone had run a tack strip up and down with a careless hand. The dogs didn't jump or whine. They didn't look for their owners or stare her down. They watched the doors. She would park and see them turn to the glass, and then, when they noticed her, they shifted aside politely to open a space where a person could go through. She felt, walking between them, that she was crossing a fence line she couldn't see. Once she reached to touch one, to see if it would lean into her palm, and it moved its head an inch without looking at her, as if it had listened to a different instruction. A couple of cats came too. Cats did not gather anywhere, but these ones were almost lined up, tails curled into tight commas, ears swiveling toward the fans. Their fur lay parted wrong, combed in the direction you combed while thinking of other things. Inside first and then to the skin, like a mistake you couldn't correct without going bald. People stopped by the counter to say, found him in a way that was both relieved and too bright. Found her too. Found him. Finally. Their mouths smiled, but the skin around the eyes was tired and pulled tight like a sheet too small for the bed. They carried their animals differently, a hand farther away from the ribs, fingers braced in a place that said they were holding a skittish thing or a breakable thing, even when the animal in question had been a rack of beef kind of hound. Marla watched an old man pick up a little terrier whose hair lay flat and slick as grass after someone pours a bucket on it. The dog didn't look at the man, and its nails made a delicate rasp on his coat, like twigs drawing a pattern on paint. "Good news," the man said, and did not look at the corkboard when he said it. At close, she took the mop and followed the prints the day had brought. There were sand grains lodged in a pad that brushed and did not catch them. The prints smudged in a way that was almost poor, the usual rounded pads faint, the little beans you would draw for a child if you were explaining an animal track. Between those pads, though, something thin had marked the floor. She leaned down, the mop handle between elbow and ribs, and saw delicate lines, twig-like, that had left a signature the floor polish took, as if it had always been part of the texture. She made a pass with the mop, then another, watching the water grey. The marks softened but didn't leave, as though their first hello had been to the concrete and not to the dust. On her break, when the store felt like a sealed humming box and the sky outside had the colour of dishwater, She stood in aisle 3 in front of the mirror panel that was there for reasons no one remembered. A narrow rectangle that caught you slantwise and lengthened your face like a funhouse mirror that had lost its laugh. The mirror offered a view down toward the bathrooms, and the cork board hung beside them. She took to checking the board from there. In the skew, she could read a few flyer headers and the little notes such as wears red collar, prefers chicken, last seen near the old mill road. Once, while she watched that corner of skewed world, she felt something standing with the posture of someone choosing, head tilted a little the way you lean when you try to catch a conversation without being in it. Her heart did a quick step that felt private and then hurt. She turned to look at the real board. No one there. The cameras perched in their dark plastic shells above the produce never recorded any such thing. She watched the footage with the manager once when a woman claimed her purse had gone missing while she weighed avocados. The cameras caught people doing ordinary things in small, humiliating ways, adjusting waistbands, scratching noses, reading labels and flipping them back quickly, as if embarrassed to admit how much they needed to get it right. They had not caught the tilted head. The flyers curled inward at the corners, not outward, not the way paper does when the air gains weight, inward, as if reading itself, as if in love with the ink. The edges pulled toward the center where the pet's eyes were, or toward the block of text where a name lived, where you could say Daisy or Wicket or Porkchop and feel a note rung like a glass tapped with a spoon. She ran her thumbnail along the edge of one that had curled tight, and it gave off a waxy squeal. Marla had posted her own notice when her cat went missing, not because she believed in the board then, but because the act steadied her hands. Wicket was a grey tabby with a broken ear that mended at a tilt. A cat who lay on her pillow with the forward posture of an uncle settling into a story. She had moved a plant, and a window fell in a gust 2 nights earlier, and when she woke at the first freight truck hiss along the highway, Wicket had been gone. She had left some food on the stoop and called the old way, clicking her tongue and pretending she had a better offer than the whole wide outdoors. She made the flyer from a photo on her phone, Wicket on a chair back fluffy with sunlight, and wrote the kind of details people add because they want to be useful, likes the red ribbon, comes to a can opener, afraid of vacuum, friendly with neighbor's retriever. She taped it over by the corkboard and watched the tape stick until it changed its mind. She gathered tacks, then watched them go in like teeth. The cork took it. She did not have to push hard. She thought she heard a damp little sigh when the photo caught. She came to dislike the board the way you dislike an old friend who has started telling the same story wrong, adding new parts that point the whole thing toward a different ending. She took good care of it anyway. She reminded herself of maintenance schedules and the need for a working community corner. She printed the manager's receipt joke into a proper sign with pets only, until HVAC in a font that made it look like a breathless newscast. She made herself laugh. Then she slid the laugh into the trash with the other trimmings and tape curls, all the confetti of little hopes. The shelter put out a note that got shared around town and then scuffed over with arguments. If you post about a missing pet, take it down when the pet comes home, the note said. If you find a pet, call us first. If you collect stray animals, do not house them in outbuildings. Do not feed them raw meat. Do not allow them access to crawl spaces. Someone with a cleaner spreadsheet mind than Marla had added a line about counting tracks before you open the door, which would have read as a joke if the writer had not insisted with italic letters on the count part. If the doors breathe after hours, don't look. That last line made no sense, then stayed with her the way certain warnings from childhood do. Those that never happened to you, but happened to a cousin of someone you knew. The creak that ran backward at night. The whistle you never answered, even if it sounded like your mother's. Marla did her work. She stocked cereal. She pushed the broom. She told people where the condiments lived. The world tilted a degree or two. She let in the distributor, who wore a jacket with an embroidered brand name, and handed him the clipboard that smelled of grease pencil and someone else's palm. He remarked on the dogs at the door and how he did not like to move through them. He said it laughing. Marla watched him thread between the bodies and saw the way he angled his face away. Before long, people posted fewer loss notices, either because their animals came back or because they kept the loss quiet, like a rash you don't talk about till you have to. The board filled with "found" in red marker, photos of dogs who did not look proud to have been found, cats whose fur at the edges had the look of marine brush left behind after a tide drags out. It would have been easy to reduce it all to a trick of humidity and human fear. In the back room, the compressor clicked and clicked, a little nervous cough. A light in aisle 1 took to flickering, a soft throb. The entry mat trapped small burrs and stickseed that could not have grown on the parking lot's concrete, and yet there they always were, drifting as if shaken free from a sleeve. A boy who bagged for 2 days and then never came back said he swore he saw a pair of paws set themselves on the glass doors at close and pressed not with force enough to open, but with an interest that was going to learn and then show up in a human hand someday. He might have been trying to scare her, or he might have been scared himself. Either way, the manager said it was important to project calm. Marla said that aloud to herself a few times and then didn't say it again because it sounded like a bad radio advice show. She found a phone in the lost and found one evening, a little slab face down under the courtesy desk. She placed it on the shelf with the sunglasses and the single glove with a hand-stitched daisy on the wrist. The phone woke up once, on its own, the screen blue, a photo of a brindled dog staring at the camera with a solemnity that seemed almost human. The dog lived now on the board 2 steps away, where it had been pinned on a day when the rain that should have come had not yet done so. Found, someone had scrawled across the bottom a day later, as if marking a test paper. Sleep came to Marla as an idea to try, rather than a thing a body does. She lay down with her eyes open, and the usual parade of decisions came and went. Which day to pick up laundry, when to change the oil, whether the back stoop needed a coat of paint before colder days set in. Those things that place you in your little life and make it feel earned and decent. Behind those thoughts, others moved. She would sit up because she thought she heard the sound of her front door breathing, not a draft, but a steady in and out as if the wood had lungs. She would count to herself like a child trying to outrun lightning. She had promised herself she would not bring numbers into it, not with the way people were speaking in hard quantities these days, counting prints, counting breaths, counting names out loud, just to hear them hold. And then she would stand and go press her hand flat to the door. It felt not warm, not cold, not anything dramatic, only like a solid thing, a needed thing, a thing that had taken in more than it should and was thinking about it. She would sit again and wait for morning, and morning would not leap up ever. It would slide toward her like a truck cresting a hill. In the mirror in aisle 3, she saw what she saw. A shape like a person who does not want to admit to being one, precise in its patience. It learned names. That was the idea that came to her as she watched the way the paper edges curled toward the center. Names have a way of making a body inside you when you repeat them. You can feel your tongue make the shape of sound, and you remember the feel of it days later. Wicket is a silly little name, she had thought, when the kitten got called that because he liked to bat at things and send them skidding. In her mouth now, Wicket felt like the lever on a gate. Daisy was clean as water. Porkchop was a grinning thing with a soft belly. When customers said their animal's name at the counter, the syllables seemed to catch on the metal strip of the register and ride with the nickels into the drawer. She got so that she did not like ringing up pet food. The bags had photos of dogs galloping or falling asleep under a plaid blanket by a fake fireplace. Their mouths were open just enough that you could imagine a word coming out. She stacked the bags with the labels turned away. Marla's world narrowed to aisles, to the back hallway, to the block of street where she lived, and the cracked ribbon of her sidewalk. She began taking particular routes home, thinking of the shelter S-note not to let animals into crawl spaces, and then thinking of what a metaphor of a crawl space would be if a person had one. Where do you hide the idea you do not want to look at? She put Wicket S dish away, and then took it out again, and then put it away once more. She told herself that was a way to control a day. When she saw a cat that might have been him 2 blocks over, sitting in the dull sun on a railing with a single brick missing underneath, she stopped in the road and waited. The cat did not move. A car came, slowed, and then did not honk. The driver looked at her with a polite curiosity that stung. Marla said Wicket, voice light like coaxing a child, and the cat turned its face, and its eye had a sheen like the surface on milk that has sat too long on a stove. There were small changes at the store that could have been anything at all. Shrinkage reports showed a bump no one could place. The manager's calm face began to fray at the edges. Corporate sent a notice in a cheery tone about brand standards on community boards and best practices for liability, and another about animals in the entrance. A vinyl sign arrived rolled in a tube that read, "No pets beyond this point except service animals and its cousins." The dogs remained at the door regardless, politely outside the line of the mat. The sign stood on its easel like a pronouncement about a river already halfway across your yard. There were nights she stayed late to mop because she could not stand to go home. The aisles are different after hours, when there is no one to break the hum with talk. She would take her time along the freezer cases, the glass gold with condensation, her reflection a faint ghost that doubled if she moved too quickly. The fans kicked and then settled, a pattern like someone thinking loudly. In the time after close, the doors were supposed to quiet down, their usual hiss when they sensed a person dulled. Lately there were moments she would hear a change, a slow inhale that pulled on the weather strip with a fleshy sound, and her back would go slick under her shirt. The shelter AS line came back with a stubbornness that felt like someone sticking a finger in a bruise. If the doors breathe after hours, don't look. She swept and did not look. She told herself she was the kind of person who followed instructions when they seemed stupid, because those are the ones that will hold if you do not think about them too hard. But the choice to look or not look existed like an itch you are not supposed to scratch. It grew bigger because of being denied. She thought, I should take down my notice, and this thought arrived heavy and patient, like a person who intends to stay a while. She could pull the tacks. She could match her standing instruction to the shelters and make them one thing. She would sweep and then walk there and lift the paper. She would hold Wicket's printed face and fold it, even though the paper would not fold in a neat line where she demanded, and after that she would go home and not count anything at all. She thought it, and yet she moved as if the floor had been rearranged. She swept and did not go there. She put the mop away and then took it out again, and then drenched it and slopped a dark spill on the floor in a way that disappointed her. When she finally set the yellow bucket in its closet, she told herself, this is it. The place was nearly vastly quiet, that word that only makes sense in situations like this, where it seems inevitable that something will fill the silence and you know it is already on its way. The doors took a breath. The sound was not loud. It could have been no more than a pressure change from a truck in the lot 2 buildings over, a push and pull you would not register if you were not tuned like a guitar string among other guitar strings. Marla's body noted it. She bent over to tie a shoe that did not need tying, a way of dropping her head, and admitting to herself that she had heard. She thought of the mirror in aisle 3 and how she disliked the way her face had lengthened there, the way tired makes a person's features spread. She told herself to stand up. She told herself to do the one small useful thing she had designed for herself. On the walk to the board, she felt a little lift of the tiled floor now and then, as if it tried to become a floor for something heavy. She reached the flyers and saw how they had leaned in toward one another, a tender ingathering that suggested a conversation men were not part of. She reached for the top left tack on her flyer and found her fingers slippery. She wiped them on her jeans. The tack gleamed and the metal looked new, like a tooth. When she tried to pull it, her appendages did not feel like they were arranged correctly for that task. She put her nails under the disc and wiggled. The tack resisted. She tried again with steadiness. She felt instead of her a squeak, as of the cork working around the stem. It was not that it had rusted in, it was that the board liked it there. It had made a place for it and did not want to imagine the hole empty. She turned her head because the doors drew another small breath. The air moved a little on her stippled forearm. Behind the glass, the parking lot slept with that local way of sleeping places have, lights humming, a paper bag pinned under a tire on the far side whispering to itself. One dog sat there like a statue with a burr chain down its back. Marla looked at the posture of the animal, and something about the head made a logic she did not want. It tilted a fraction of a degree, not toward her, toward the board. The tack came free under her thumb, with the slurp of something used to being wet. The top right tack resisted longer, then came with suddenness that made her pinch her finger pad. She slid the paper out inch by inch, careful around each corner, as if she were unwrapping a cut she'd put a bandage on last week and didn't want to disturb the scab. The bottom tacks held the longest, and she had to lean on the third, the one near the printed sentence about the can opener. That tack bent under pressure, and in the dim of the after-hours light she saw that the bend made a tiny joint. The metal was not metal there. It gave like cartilage. She paused. She told herself to stay inside what she knew. People will explain odd things with words like humidity and maintenance, and real answers are often unglamorous. But the tack had a soft hinge. You do not find that in office supplies. In the mirror, in aisle 3, which she could see from the corner of her eye where she stood, there was the patient shape. It did not hurry. It did not need to. The flyers around her own turned toward it like plants to a window. The post about a ferret's habit of stealing socks had curled so tightly that the ink on the word socks blurred as if it were moving. The board looked full. She thought of a beehive cut open and shown in cross-section, honey cells gloved in wax. She got her paper free. Wicket on the chair back looked at her from the rectangle in her hand. He looked ordinary and half bored, and he was not here. The doors breathed again. The air tasted of cold dust. She pressed the tacks down with her fingers in each hole, because something in her freaked at the idea of those holes left open like open eyes or drains. She had learned to close things when she could. She slid Wicket's paper under her arm. She stood, and the shape in the mirror had tipped more, as if curious about the change. In that same instant, as if movement had woken a response, she heard from behind her a sound that could have been a cat's soft tread, and from the corner of the store where the greeting cards lived, a tiny chiming as a rack jostled against itself. She could imagine a body moving along the back end cap, keeping the pressure of its shoulder on the space where metal ended and floor began. Marla walked toward the back hall. She tried to make her steps ordinary. There is a way your feet hit the ground when you mean no harm, and a way they do when you run. She carried her flyer under her arm, like she would carry a report, a piece of mail, a note someone had asked her to set aside. She did not look at the doors. In the corridor, she leaned with her forehead briefly against the cold metal of the employee entrance and felt the thump of her own head in there, that small enclosed pulse that proved she was both vulnerable and alive. She did not whisper words, and she did not pray, not because she was above it, but because the words felt like bait. She ought to count the tracks at home, the shelter had said. She had thought then of numbers like stones you drop one by one into a glass. She had thought too of how easily a count could go wrong and cure nothing. The board had its own breath. She had not noticed until standing far from it, but the air in the hallway did a shallow rhythm, as if trying to match in practice what it had learned by watching. She held very still. The market at night liked to reassert itself, to remind you that thousands of discrete products arranged to be defensible under fluorescent judgment made up a world you were small inside. There was a sound from the front, a scrape like a paw or a branch, not urgent and not. She went into the office, shut the door quietly, and counted not numbers but tasks she should finish, making the list in ordinary words. Close drawers, bag trash, check the light on the compressor to see if it has gone from cautious green to angry red, leave note for morning lock alarm. Breathe. She had pulled her flyer. She had done the thing she had set in front of herself as a goal, like a bright wrapped package you pretend not to care about and then are allowed to open. She slid the paper into her bag and did not look at it again. She would take it home and fold it neatly and place it under the dictionary she used to use to look up if she had spelled things right before the phone came and told you without making you feel better. She would put the paper there and not look at it and see what happened next. On her walk to the car, the dogs moved aside for her and for the shape that walked beside her, the one that made no sound and yet made a space. She had a feeling the way you get at a crosswalk when a driver in a truck seems like they might not see you. She did what you do then, lifted a hand, made herself a person there in the space, visible. She reached the car and kept her head angled as if she were listening to something else. The key bit the lock and turned, and she slid in, shut the door on all of it in a way that convinced precisely no one. The house offered few answers. Her kitchen clock made its little step, and because all clocks must sound like heartbeats at night, it did. The fridge hummed. It added its note to the one that came home with her now, that thin, high underlay that made her mind imagine the inside of wires. She washed a glass and dried it and set it down and picked it up again. The night asked nothing. The door had its breath. She let the silence stand. The next day, customers brought their animals in closer than the sign suggested. They would come to the entries, and the dogs would sit down, tails arranged with a carefulness she had not seen before, almost like the way a violinist puts a hand upon the neck of an instrument not yet lifted. The cats pressed into the legs of their people, if people is the word you use, for those that held the leashes and asked for advice on brands, and moved their fingers as if the words were out ahead of them scouting. A woman from town whose name Marla had somehow never learned, despite seeing her 2-3 times each week, stood with a cat carrier and hummed to herself. The hum threaded under the dairy case's wine and through the paper song of the bags, and it felt like a braid in which all those sounds belonged to the same rope now. A man picked up a bag of feed and then set it down and then picked it up. He looked at the corkboard and did the thing. He reached to take down his notice and paused, as though he had changed his intention mid-swing. He left it. He moved on. The calendar that had hung on the office wall for months with a photo of a lighthouse no one in this landlocked county had seen had slipped its thumbtack and hung by a single corner. Marla pushed it up and secured it. The pin bit like a tooth again, and she tried to keep from hearing the sound. There were scribbles along the edge, where the manager had jotted notes about deliveries and drivers. There were fewer now. The handwriting had changed in a way that said a person had been teaching himself to form the loops differently. The more she looked, the more she got a small intolerance in the shoulder joints, an itch to move her arms into positions that would quiet her muscles. She stacked, she swept, she avoided the aisle where the mirror lived and then walked right to it, because avoidance makes a path in the brain, and sometimes the only thing is to walk through. She stood and watched the board in the mirror and counted out long breaths and forced herself not to hear them as numbers. She saw a flyer lift in the corner where the ink was thick with the names. She saw the edges tuck in tender and then relax again, like a person saying a name they do not want to forget. She watched until her eyes watered from not blinking, and then let herself blink and swear. She kept her own notice in her bag. She did not put it back. In the afternoon it rained for a while, a straight, steady sheet that cleared the air of its breath and left a clean smell of asphalt and wet paper. People shook themselves at the entrance. The dogs' coats shed water and lay slick and dark. Burrs fell in a little sprinkle from fur and hit the mat and clicked. She pushed the mat aside to sweep under it and found a set of marks she had not noticed because they lived under the mat. Thin lines like tiny radios drawn in pencil in 2 neat rows. If you pressed your finger there, you felt the same as if you had run your finger along an old scar. The marks ran to the doors and then made a decision and turned toward the bathrooms, toward the board. That evening, as she locked, the front doors took a breath that was the store itself, telling her it knew she had kept something it wanted. She put her hand in her bag to feel the paper there, folded and still stiff. The flyer's corners had wilted a little. "If the doors breathe after hours, don't look," the shelter had written. She closed her eyes though she was outside, as if that might count. She thought of the tacks soft hinge. She thought of the thing in the glass of aisle 3, not a person, not. She thought of names, and of the way names belong to whoever says them with a certain tilt in the mouth. Some nights the house makes a different kind of dark, one that feels like you have not touched it correctly yet. Marla lay on her bed and turned her face into the pillow and let herself imagine Wicket at her neck, the small weight, the air of whiskers. She permitted herself to picture him arriving at the door with a look on his face that meant he had a story to tell about where he had been and how it was not interesting. She told herself she would count the tracks if she saw any. She would count them twice. And then once more, not with numbers, but with the persistence you use on stains. She slept. She woke to the sound of a card sliding on wood. She did not move. The house had accepted something. She could feel it in the way the air pressed the space near the floor. She lifted her head a little and heard again the quiet shift of a door that does not open all the way, that breathes instead and lets in only as much as the room can hold. She sat up and made her standing slow. She moved to the door and placed her ear against it and listened. On the other side, there was a pacing like a person learning how to pace, as if counting by feel the distance between steps and the place where the rug ends. She did not open. She bent to look at the gap under the door. There were faint lines there, a set of 2 neat rows, and the dust had been brushed back in a way that made a small fan of grays. In the morning, she brought the flyer back to the store and kept it in her bag. She did not put it back on the board. She worked her shift as if the store had not tilted. Around midday, a young girl who had once been all talk and now had turned quiet handed Marla a piece of paper. The handwriting bowed toward careful. "Found him," it said at the top, and below, a photo of a grey tabby with a broken ear in the style of head tilt that said one thing only: "Yes, of course." The girl smiled with all her teeth and then folded the paper back to her chest like a prize she would hold for exactly as long as it took to pry it from her. Marla's own smile came slow and honest and pained. "Where?" she asked, the single word in a voice that had dust in it. The girl said her block. The girl said the alley that ran behind the row of small houses with the stoops that had never kept paint for more than 1 season. "He was under the table by the stoop," the girl said, like he knew he was hiding right and waiting for someone he would trust. "He came out when I said his name. He came out when I said Wicket." Marla's hands did a small electric thing. She put the paper to the side as if it would burn. "You did good," she said, because it was what people said when children did the thing you could not do yourself. The girl's smile changed shape, as if it had gotten tired of holding the role and wanted to be something else. She leaned in and lowered her voice in the way people do when the information is precious, because it has been difficult to hold. "He felt different," the girl said. "Not bad." just like the kind of different when you turn and someone has moved the furniture an inch. After that, the afternoon thickened with a waiting quality. The dairy case had a tremble in its hum, like a voice faltering and catching and pretending it had not. The fans pushed air with a low tire burr. The corkboard had settled into a fullness that was almost beautiful if you did not know its shape had changed. People came and went. Someone framed in the doorway and did not come in, and then did. Marla spent a long time fronting soup cans so that the labels were plain. She kept thinking of the name said by a voice that had no business knowing it. She kept thinking of the tack hinge. She stopped and felt her chest, and then stepped into the employee bathroom and sat on the closed lid and breathed one breath after another until the air stopped skidding. When her shift ended, the sky had a tangerine cut along the western line and then went to bruise, and then to a steady old denim. Marla drove home down the road that had always been 2 lanes and felt longer than it was. She parked crooked and straightened and turned the key and sat for a minute with her hands on the wheel. She decided not to count tracks more than once. She did not like to form contracts with herself that she would break. She took her bag and the paper the girl had given her and went to the door and stood there in the low light and said the name because it was a right thing to do. "Wicket," she said, and her voice cracked on the second half the way it does when something real is trying to pass through it. In the yard, the of course answers arrived. A stir under something metal, a shush of dead leaves making room, a paw set down in the one place that would make that exact thin sound. When she opened the door, she held it only so far. She held it as if she were checking the weather. On her stoop, there was the cat with the broken ear, his head carrying itself with the old comic caution she loved. His fur lay in the wrong direction at the edges and then corrected itself when he breathed. He stopped at the threshold and did the polite thing of scenting the edge and then the frame and then the air near her hand. He moved his mouth once, as if trying a syllable he had not used in a while. When she stepped back, he came in with a liquid grace that makes you forgive cats all their sins. He walked with the pacing of someone who had learned the room from the map of the board, rather than from his own memory of table leg and chair rung. He went to the corner where he had always slept, and then veered and stood a moment at the refrigerator, as if listening to something the appliance was making up as it went along. He looked back at her, and the look went straight through whatever she had arranged in herself to hold this moment. "Wicket," she said again. He blinked in that slow way that means I can be trusted, and she wanted that blink to decide everything. She watched his paws on the kitchen rug. The prints they left were prints and not prints. They were pads, and then between, something that touched lightly and moved away. She looked away and then looked back and saw nothing alarming except the old beloved animal tired and home. She knelt and he placed a paw on her knee, the way he did when he was going to make bread with his front feet on her thigh. The pads were warm. Between them, she felt a whisper of cool, as if a thread of air were drawn along her skin by something inside the paw she could not map. She closed her hand gently over that paw and then released it. She fed him. He ate with enthusiasm and a delicateness that had grown into him. He did not bolt and did not leave any. He went to the water dish and paused, and then drank, not in the way he had before. He drank as if he were remembering how water tastes here and making a note. He went to the back door and stood at it and put a paw on the wood. The house took a breath and gave it back. She told herself to be practical. Count the tracks, the paper had said. Her house did not present as a place with tracks. She stood outside on the stoop as if they would be there. The evidence of another thing, with make and model, 2 routes in, 2 routes out. The yard was a yard. The dirt had the pattern of a night critters laid in it, in a faint bass note. She called out a name that belonged to no one. No one answered. He slept on her pillow that night with the posture of a man who has had a better day. He breathed, and his breath had something of a schedule to it, like a shift watch. Marla lay there, eyes open to the ceiling where tiny cracks spidered out from the overhead light, like a diagram of all the ways you could go if you chose to leave. She let herself drift. She woke once to the sound of the front door lying and telling her there was a change in pressure. She did not get up. She placed her hand over her heart. She waited and then fell like a stone into another hour. At the store, the corkboard ate. That is the word that came to her because she had caught the sound once, a soft, laboring chew, a farmer's mouth working on a straw. Bound posters came. People did not take down their lost ones unless someone told them. She took down those when she was sure. She put them by the courtesy desk with the sunglasses and the glove, and the collection of things people leave when they have thought of something else in a hurry. Found him, deadpan written in a corner by a hand that was trying not to feel the wrongness of it. Found her, thanks, and then a name that had slid from being a call to being a label. The manager said he had called the HVAC man 3 times. The duct man had called him back once and left a message about how whole systems take a while to stop being what they were and become what you want. Marla caught a phrase in the message about damp intrusion and how sometimes a building wicks up what S beneath it. The word wick pleased her and made her stomach give a little jerk. She pictured a building drawing a marsh through its foundation and into its hung ceilings, and somehow that made sense of dogs and cats and doors that tried to breathe. She stopped playing music over the speakers in the mornings. The market did not want other voices now. There were no attempts at jokes any longer. Pets only till HVAC had stopped being a funny sign and become the way you accept a line you do not cross. Customers came and read it and then passed by it and stopped at the board and turned their faces and did the work of deciding. The board knew more names now. If you stood by it long enough, the air near it had a taste the way pennies do, a copper tang that sat in the nose passage and reminded you you are an animal too. Marla kept track of the way the flyers leaned. Some leaned toward the top, as if they tried to read the store hours taped there, sensing when their hope would be tended. Some curved toward the floor in a tired bow. Her own notice did not exist there any longer. When she went to fix something, she could still feel the shape of that gap where her own had been pinned. Not in sight, but in the mathematics of how much paper can crowd a space. On a quiet afternoon, an old man with a windbreaker zipped over a sweater that belonged to a different decade came to the counter and put down a bag of hard candy and asked, by the way, if anyone had told the shelter about the gap under the bathroom doors. He said he had noticed it while washing his hands and thought how a small, clever animal could half slip under and hold itself there and then slide back out. And would that be something to make certain of? Marla asked which door and thanked him and went to look when she could. The gap was as gaps are, an imperfection adjusted for by the grey rubber strip meant for that purpose. But the line of dust along it had a fluted edge, like something had been pushed there and breathed. She wiped it with a damp towel and watched the line of wet darken, a little mouth laid sidewise on tile. On her walk home now, she took the side streets. It made no difference to the distance. The town did not have many ways to travel without seeing someone you knew, and her kindness had always been to talk to those who liked talking. Now she hid behind hedges and mailboxes and hated it. She felt the market sound in her hair like static. When she reached her house, she stood a long time halfway up her walk and looked at her front door for the line of breath that would seem to move it like lungs. She did see it. She did not look too long. She went to the side step and let herself in that way, sliding the key back and forth to feel the grit in the lock, the grit that told a person no one had cleaned in there for a while. And what did that say about her, acceptably or unacceptably? Wicket came like he had heard the refrigerator say his name. He rubbed her shin and then did another loop, and then passed into the living room in a curve that made the hair on her arms lift just briefly. She told herself it was because the air had cooled. At the store, people who had posted before began to return, and stand in front of the board not to add or remove, but to attend. There was a posture she learned to recognize, the way a shoulder drops and a foot makes a little back and forth, as if to convince the body it does know balance. Those people were like her, and she wished she could store them somewhere safe, where the board would not look at them the way a tree looks at someone cutting its bark. Once, by accident, because she had reached without looking, she set her palm flat on the cork. It was warm, not hot. Warm like the back of your neck, where hair grows soft and sweat inches along when you are nervous in a way you pretend not to be. She pulled back, as if she had been reprimanded. Her palm smelled sweet for a moment, and then metallic for longer. Wicket came and went. He avoided the spots in the house where the breeze got in or out, and instead learned new routes that did not make sense to a person who had watched him for years. He walked along the couch back and then paused, and rather than jumping to the chair as he had always done, he stepped down, went behind the end table where nothing but lost pennies and lint lived, and emerged with a sound like a piece of paper sliding off a smooth surface. He pressed his flank against the baseboard as if you could read there a path. He slept and woke and watched the door. More than once, he set his paw on the wood and pressed without his claws. The wood remembered and swelled and eased. The house learned and returned the lesson. In the mirror in aisle 3, the shape grew more familiar the more she did not want it to. It had no face you could describe. It had patience. It had the tilt of someone listening to a story and deciding if the teller has earned it. The board's names silted down and made a floor under everything. The manager's face lost the portion that did reassuring. He began to move in tight triangles from office to counter to dairy and back. He sent in the time-off request for his own trip to a seminar in a city far enough away to be safe in the imagination, and then he did not go. He stayed with his own store because he did not trust the doors. He asked Marla if she felt fine, and of course she said yes. And then came the day that did not decide anything, but tightened everything. A line built at the register. A pallet arrived with things she had not ordered. The phone rang twice, and then twice again, and then wheezed once. The electric left the backlights in the cooler and brought them back and left them once more, as if exercising a choice. The board grew still. That detail made her pivot. She looked at it because it had stopped its small inner wind, and that silence was new. The flyers lay quiet. The names held their breathing on purpose. She looked until she saw the one word she did not want. Not on paper, in the texture. The cork had learned the shape. Wicket, she saw, spelled with holes, as if where a tack had been pushed and pulled, and another had made a set, and now the negative space wrote the word. She closed her eyes and opened them and watched the same holes making the same letter forms. Her knees felt like the tangled knot in an extension cord you pull and only make worse. She thought then of the advice about counting tracks, and for the first time she believed not that it was a superstition, but that it might be a tool to name the size of a door. When she arrived home, the front door breathed in a way that was not pretending. Wicket met her at the stoop, and the way he placed his feet was the way someone does who expects a floor. She let him in and closed the door and stood inside, back to it, and counted without numbers. She counted with the map of her own breath. She counted with the time it took for the house to adjust to her. It felt like a long time, and then a short time, and then neither. She bent and examined the scuff marks on the floor just inside. There were rows there, 2 neat sets where there had been one, and in between fine lines she could not call claws, not thread, not root, something that grows in the dark and prefers to move along an edge. She set her palm to the wood and said her cat's name like a person in a small town says something ordinary at a funeral and feels like they have done the brave thing. She leaned her head against the panel. Behind it the night found a rhythm, as if every door in the block had agreed upon one. She did not look. She listened until listening began to make the shape of a face out of nothing. And then she stopped and stepped away. Wicket had curled in his favorite place, except that he had chosen the other side of the chair and had tucked his paws in a way that made a thought move across her that she tried not to keep. He opened one eye and then closed it. He had learned her in a different order, and that was not his fault. Marla washed up, she made toast, butter took easily into it. The smell of it rose and made a friend of her for a minute. She set the plate on the counter and watched crumbs make a pattern and then lose it. She thought that everything had edges and that anything could be taught to breathe. That whisper dragged along the flooring returned, a gentle patter, like a polite thing not wanting to interrupt. She pressed her hand flat to the fridge and felt its hum and thought ridiculous and vivid of the dog in the photo on the lost phone eyes, with a human patience that came from learning a name and liking the feel of how it was said. That night, she sat at the kitchen table and wrote the sentence she had carried in her mouth for a week and had not yet made real. She wrote it on a receipt from the store and taped it in her mind to a board. It read, "When your pet comes home, count the tracks before you open the door." It read, "If the doors breathe after hours, don't look." She pictured the board beside the bathrooms and her own handwriting that the community had learned to call the store S, as if the hand of a person could be an institutional voice if you put it up in a public place. She pictured someone reading those lines and feeling seen and refusing to admit it. She pictured pulling her notice at close and then living with whatever came next. Wicket woke and chirruped in the old way, a single syllable that said everything is in order until it isn't. Marla lifted her eyes. She thought, not for the first time, about the camera domes that saw people do ordinary cringe things and never once caught a shape that had forever. The mirror in aisle 3 had, though. Mirrors catch the truth that cameras choose not to see. She blinked and then, because it had been a long day and the night had a decision all its own, she went to the door and set her palm against it and decided once more not to look. In the morning she would go in early again, because she always did, and the hum would be there, and the dogs in their row with their burr collars, and the cats with their fur, like a mistake, corrected by breath. And the board would look full in a way that made you feel generous toward it if you didn't stay to think. She would unlock and light and till and start coffee. She would fix tape curls and pull tacks and lean on the spoon to pry bent metal free. She would arrange the paper edges so that whoever needed to read could. She would take down her own notice quietly and say nothing to anyone and tell herself that was helpful. She would walk aisle 3 and catch in the mirror the tilt of a head at the edge of the frame, a shape, learning the pronunciation of every name it had eaten. She would tell herself not to see it. Then she would see it anyway. She would hold its patience and wonder which of them would tire first. She would breathe the store S breath and count the breath, and then try once more to forget the number. She would pretend forgetting would save her. She would tell herself she had done all she could. She would tell herself Wicket knew the way home, and the trick now was to make the place he came to remember them in the proper order. When she lay down, right then, because there was a limit to how much waiting you could make do for a lifetime, she felt the house's breath meet hers and afterwards separate again. She slept and dreamed a board with no holes at all, only a single sheet of cork as clean as a field in fresh snow, pale and unwalked. In the dream, she pressed a thumb into it and left there the print of a person who knew the word for the shape of a door. In the dream, someone pressed from the other side, and the place where their fingers met went warm in a way that would not leave. In the morning, she got up before the traffic out on the highway had chosen how loud to be and found Wicket sitting on the sill of the front window. He had never sat there long before. Once in a while, he would take the sun in that square, blink at dust and drift off, but he did not hold watch. Now he held it in a way that felt like a night guard taking a last routine tour after the world went home. His ear, healed long ago in that jaunty slant she loved, had lost some of its joke. It angled like a tool at rest on a bench. He turned his head as she came in and made a sound that started in his throat and then changed shape in his mouth before it left. She did not try to read meaning. She brought her fingers to his cheek and felt the warm whisker bed, and the way hair lay wrong at the edges, brushed from underneath as if a breeze had risen from the floorboards. At the market, the lights woke with a show of cooperation and settled into their buzz. She did the routine in order because order is a kindness. Unlock, lights, tills, coffee, sweep the entry where the mat chafed the floor so you could hear grit skitter like insects. The dogs outside looked at the seam where the doors met rather than at her. Their eyes had a dull shine that is not lack of life, but a kind of withheld focus, as if they were practicing. She passed between them and did not touch any, and thought she could feel the lift of air around their bodies, as if they bowed without moving. The cats held their tails in a bar that never twitched. The board waited. She had the feeling you get when you know someone has looked through your drawers while you were out, and you cannot prove it, but your toothbrush faces the way you do not put it, and your socks have been folded with a stranger's hands. The flyers were packed dense now. There was not much space to get a finger in to ease out a corner without disturbing 8 other edges. She set a fresh stack of tacks in a paper cup on the courtesy counter because people came with damp papers and apologetic faces and said the printer at the library did not do good black, and were these good enough, and would the board accept them? The board accepted everything with a face on it, anything that said what is precious enough to name. A note had been slid under the door overnight from corporate, the kind of cheery directive that lives forever in a folder no one checks. It said to keep community boards neat, to avoid controversial material, to rotate out outdated postings, to refer owners to the proper channels, to decline postings that advertised in-home clinics or medical advice, to avoid personal data, such as addresses. Marla laughed once at the last line because it was the one that would have mattered if anyone in the town had held faith with rules. She tucked the note into the office because you cannot throw away the signatures of people who can come look for them. The shelter left a stack of leaflets on the counter, all soft green and clean type, explaining how to introduce a returned pet to a home that had changed while they were gone. The sheet advised patience, slow reintroduction, keeping a door between, letting each smell the other's life first, counting the signs of stress on fingers, and then stopping when numbers made your breath shorten. Marla placed the leaflets where the light did not bleach them, and where a person might take one and tuck it up a sleeve without making a public act out of wanting help. The first leaflet on top began to curl in at one corner toward the word smell, and she flattened it, and it lifted again, and she let it. About mid-morning, the HVAC man actually came. He stood in the entry with his metal box and his shirt with his name over his heart, and he looked at the ceiling and he listened. After a while, he took a ladder off his truck and opened a tile and pushed his hand into the dark and did the slow reach of a person deciding whether or not to believe his own hand. He said he saw a bit of condensation where it shouldn't be, that something below could be making the air feel heavy. He said the word negative pressure and then asked if the bathroom fans worked. The manager pointed at the switch, which made a fan drone and then mewl and then work like a tired person looking for keys. The HVAC man went to the board because it was by the bathrooms and because looking at a thing that has taken on a character feels like part of anyone's job. He stood at a formal distance, as if at a wake. He took one step closer and looked at the paper edges and then at the cork and then down at his hands, as if counting screws without having to see them. He said, half to himself, "You do not often see a board hold like that." He said it with respect, like a carpenter looking at a joint that has outlived the plan. He left behind a slip with a scribble about returning another day to test the balance of flow. The slip had grease on the corner. Marla put it near the register, the way you keep a strange coin in your pocket until you decide if it is luck or just metal. The manager asked her how she felt about a spring cleaning in fall. He said the board should come down for a day, let the wall breathe, let the paint settle. He said he could order a fresh Cork sheet from the catalogue. He said he would like things to be easy for a day. Marla kept her face still and said she would help with screws. She did not say she had touched the board and felt the warmth of it, the faint copper of it. She did not say she had heard it take something into itself that did not come from the printer doucesse tray. They waited until after close, because it is wrong to move a town's voice while the town watches. The manager brought out a little bucket of tools, and because he took pride in doing it the right way, he had the driver bits in their case like candy. They moved the sign that asked people to wash their hands and the one that asked people to report spills. The screws holding the board had been painted as part of the wall at some point. Paint had sealed the heads into little cups. The first one gave with a polite pop, a sound like a cork when you do not want the party to feel showy. The second would not turn, and then did. The last two did not register that they were screws at all. The driver bit brought up powder. The manager swore softly and reached for a smaller bit, then a larger. The way you do when you refuse to admit the thing you are doing will not be done like other things. Marla held the board steady, flattening a palm against each of the lower corners. The cork felt live under the thin veneer. As the top edge pried from the wall, there came a smell that was not mold and not dust exactly. A sweet wetness, like a field turned over. A scent of soil that has not seen daylight in seasons. The manager frowned and put his shoulder under the edge and pumped a little to free the grab. The whole piece moved forward a slow inch. Paper edges fluttered, and all the animal's eyes, taken together, seemed to shift in their gloss as though catching a sudden light. Marla felt an ache in her wrists, as if she held a heavy living thing that would not be well afterward, if she let it drop even an inch. She said, "Wait," though she could not have told you who she was speaking to, and then the manager lost his grip and the bottom edge thumped against the bathroom tile wainscot, and the fluttering stopped, and the smell rose like a breath. Behind the board, the wall was a darker rectangle where the paint had been kept from the light. The screws at the bottom did not exist. In their place were two neat, wet holes. The manager stepped back and made another face, not the reasonable one, and wiped his hand on his jeans and did not want to look at what was on his palm. They set the board on the floor, face up. Flyers exposed like a table fell over and spilled mail. The cork on the back had a nap to it like suede, and when Marla stroked it because she could not stop herself, it pressed back faintly into her touch. The manager said they would take it out back and prop it against the dumpster and sweep up. He said it the way a person says, "We will just walk down the aisle and say the words, and then have cake after." He looked at her and she nodded, because that is what you do when someone needs the nod to be the answer that makes the next moment live. They lifted it between them like a gurney. The board did not feel heavy in pounds. It felt heavy in attention, as if the whole town's breath sat there and had to be held to keep it from spilling. They took it through the back hall and out into the wedge of lot behind the store, where pallets leaned and oil spots marked a map that never cleaned. They set the board down against the grey metal of the dumpster and stood away. This is where you would imagine the easy thing. You would think the flyers would go slack like ordinary paper. You would think the air would change. Instead, the back of the board touched the metal and made a faint kissing sound like wet wood set against wet wood. And after a moment, the metal showed a small fog where contact had warmed it. The manager said he would get a broom and sweep, and he did, moving with a decision that said he did not want to be present for this part. Marla crouched and looked at the holes where screws should have been. They were not shaped like drywall crumble. They were neat and wet, and they looked as if something with a mouth had taken learning seriously. She stood up and placed both her hands on the board, palms flat. a person saying hello to a horse that may or may not accept a touch. The flyers lay quiet. The names on them looked up like a field of signs. She felt a pressure at the heel of her hand and pulled back. Under her palm, the cork had given a little and then drawn itself back, the way skin will move when you press against a place that has learned to stretch. She did not show that she had felt it. She backed away and joined the manager in an ordinary tone as he swept and knocked grit into the pan and frowned at a lid that would not close. They left the board there on the dumpster because they did not want to put it back and did not know where else to set it. They went in and locked, and the doors gave their breath in and out as if calmed. In the morning, the board had slid 3 inches along the metal, leaving behind a smear as neat as a snail's idea of straightness. They carried it back in because there was, in the end, nowhere else for it to be. The wall had a dark rectangle that would have startled people more than a full board would. The manager said later he would make time for primer and a new sheet. For now, put it back. He put the driver bit to the top holes and found something to bite. Though the bit came away with a sweetness on it, he wiped with a towel and then threw away without saying why. Marla held the bottom while he set the top, and when the board lifted into place, the paper edges trembled and leaned in as a flock does when it finds its wind again. After that, she stopped thinking in tidy arcs like, if we do this, then we will come to a satisfying next. Life in the store turned into increments and managed tolerances. The dogs waited outside in wider rings and began once or twice to look at one another as if comparing notes. A cat eased its paw under the edge of the door and touched the mat and pulled it an inch and then another inch until Marla stepped on the mat and said aloud, without thinking, "No." The cat withdrew its paw and considered her with an unblinking patience that felt like a lesson, and then the paw went away and a whisper of fine lines showed in the mat that would not sweep. The board learned more names. The new posters that said found had a different pride to them than they used to. The ones that said lost looked compacted as if the paper had been folded in a pocket for days before anyone admitted it should be posted. The flyers began to arrive with fewer phone numbers, as if owners had understood that the exchange in play was not one a phone would help. A man came in with a rolled poster in the better paper you buy when you think presentation will push fortune, and when he unrolled it, he revealed a photo of a bird with feathers banded in complex ways that suggested a love of systems. He explained without being asked that this bird had been a comfort to his wife after a long series of medical surprises. And his hands opened when he said the wife's name, as if he were letting it step through him, the name itself. Marla watched the banding on the feathers in the photo bend as the paper twigged inward. She pinned it where it wanted to go, more toward the center than others, as if it had been reserved, and felt under her thumb a faint tick, as of a nerve. There were afternoons now where the sliding doors breathed with the rhythm of something half asleep and dreaming. They would inhale long and low, and the air inside the store would sink toward the floor, and then they would exhale, and the bags along the end cap would lift the smallest amount and settle as if they had been breathed on by a patient nurse. The shelter began to send over messages in tighter language. "Please," they wrote, "remove notices when the animal has returned home. Please do not report a return to us without removing your notice. Please count tracks. Please close food bins. Please keep doors shut. Please stop leaving dishes on stoops." The sequence of pleases made a rope out of sentences. Marla felt the pull and then the laxity as people listened and forgot and listened again. Wicket learned new routes through the house and then returned to old ones with a new gait. He did not sleep where he had before. He chose the back of the couch rather than the pillow. He paced the floor by the door and lay down with his body aligned perfectly along the seam in the boards, as if reading a seam is how a person rests. Once he went to the screen and set his paws on it and leaned, not with the weight it would take to push it out, but with a slow, studious pressure, and the screen bowed and returned and made a soft drum note. She listened to the sound he made then, a mouth noise that had something like a test in it. He came to her when she said his name. He bumped his head under her hand, like a cat whose joy looks like headbutting. He also stopped halfway across the room when she said it, and turned as if some other voice had said it behind him, and asked for him without requesting his heart. Customers came with stories. Some told them with humor, because humor is a way to make the number of things you can control seem larger. Some whispered because a market is not where you want to be serious unless you need to be. A woman said that when she called to the cat they had found, a cat with a new sheen on its coat like a varnish. The cat had looked at her with recognition that felt imitated rather than born. She said she did not say this to her husband because he would say you are making trouble where there is none. A boy flushed and said his dog had forgotten a trick, not the kind that wins ribbons, but the one you all agree is your trick on a day when you need something simple, a tap of the nose to a finger, a hop over a shoe, a bedtime roll. He said the dog now did another little thing that nobody had taught. He smiled like he would like to take that as a gift. Then he did not smile at all. The manager started closing earlier. He said it was just till the lighting issue with the parking lot got fixed, or until corporate sent the replacement timer, or until the wholesale Lot 2 buildings over stopped leaving their forklifts wheezing in the dusk. People adjusted because people adjust to anything with enough practice. The quiet hour she loved grew longer and grew weird, and she began to dread it and hunger for it at the same time. She walked aisle 3 twice, as if the second pass would undo the first. In the mirror, the patient shape stood, its head cocked in the study of a language. It did not move when she moved. It moved when she said the names in her head. It leaned a hair toward Daisy, a hair toward Porkchop, a notable tilt toward Wicket. If she refused to say the names even inside herself, the shape grew bored and looked elsewhere, and that felt like a reprieve she had not earned. Once she tried to trick it, she invented names aloud in the emptiness. Spruce Pennywheel Crackle. And the shape did not stir until one of the words she thought harmless brushed some real pet in town, and then there came a tender incline and she shut her mouth. She understood finally why the shelter wanted names taken down, not only because of the public ritual of closure, but because the board took names as a meal. You take away a plate when someone is done, you clear up. She began to pull notices. She did it with a method that made her feel less like a thief. If she had seen the animal in the store in a carrier, if she had heard a relieved voice say found, if she had been handed a photo by a child who needed to tell the story of how the animal was under the stoop, under the shed, under the steps near the fence, in the bushes at the back door, she would take down the original lost notice and put it by the courtesy desk with the other things that waited for the orbit of a life to bring them back to hand. For the quiet ones, the ones with no resolution, she would leave them because hope is a cord that you can keep plucking as long as your fingers hold. Each tack she pulled made a soft, giving sound as before, a mouth letting go of a straw. The first evening she took down more than a handful. The doors breathed in a way that felt heavier, as though an effort had been made and resented. A paper she had not touched fluttered its edges angrily and then settled, embarrassed at showing temper. She took her own old sign out of her bag and held it without looking, a rectangle that carried a light oil from her hands, now a printed wicket whose eyes had the old same not looked at me look. She reached for the board to set it back to feel what would happen, and then she stopped. The way you stop when your body knows the edge of a roof and will not and cannot step 1 inch farther into air. She folded the paper instead along its photo line and placed it in a drawer under the gum display. She placed it there knowing that people leave money in that drawer at shift change, and that notes addressed to no one go there, and that someone will lift it and wonder if it matters. She placed it there so that it would live in a place that smelled like mint and cheap fruit and fingers. On the block where she lived, nights grew fuller. She could hear other doors breathing when the last late-breaking truck moaned past. The sound synced as if the street had a job and had passed probation. The woman in the small house 2 doors down began leaving a dish of food on her steps, and the dish emptied at a pace that did not accord with life as it had been. Marla stopped once and picked up the dish and handed it back to the woman and said, with her mouth making the shape of kindness, that the shelter had asked for no food left outdoors for a time. The woman nodded and set the dish down again after Marla had gone, and Marla did not knock to remind her. She had decided her quota of insisting was used up. Wicket brought her a gift she had to pretend to like, a dry seed head from the weeds that grow in the slot by the porch. He placed it on the rug and sat back with pride, and she ruffled his fur and told him he was a wonderful cat. The seed head shed a dozen burrs and slid with a whisper toward the door, as if seeking a seam to ride. She swept and carried the pan outside and shook it into the yard and shut the door and stood with her hand on the knob and counted not numbers but the rhythm her breath had taught itself, so it could be measured against the door. S. She started waking in the half of night that is not the dead of it, the hour that already holds morning if you are patient. She would stand in the doorway to the living room and watch Wicket sleep, and watch the door breathe, and name honestly to herself what she feared. Not that something would break in, but that something would try to learn the house well enough to be the house. That the shape she knew, the scuffed baseboard, the dent in the linoleum where someone had dropped a skillet years ago, the notch in the doorframe where a measuring tape once left a little bite, would be read like print by something that came patient and polite and thorough, and one day she would not be able to say where the real edges had been. At the store, life narrowed into advice and courtesy and little noises. The compressor did its click and cough. The dairy case tuned itself up 1 hair higher each day until someone walked by and slapped the side, and it stopped its climb and sulked at a normal pitch. People asked very ordinary questions that had acquired a work of theatre inside them. Do you have the brand I like? Where do you keep the rice that used to be on aisle 5? Will this ham last to the weekend if I keep it sealed? Marla answered with the workaday kindness that costs but also pays, and when she passed the mirror, she did not look except she always did. The patient shape in the mirror had learned a curve of the head that was familiar, and it took her too long to name why. It was Wicket's tilt, the one he had when the ear was first broken and then healing, a degree of angle she had comforted him through. To see it now in the skewed glass made her stomach cool, not with ice, but with the sudden absence of a gentle heat. She stepped up to the mirror and set her finger lightly to the edge, and the glass took a breath, fogging for a second, and from where she stood she saw the board plainly enough to read a name that had been penciled rather than printed. It was a name she had not yet noticed, which meant it had been posted while her head was turned elsewhere. The animal was a dog with a collar made out of a bit of rope, and the name was one that meant a thing a little kid shouts in a yard, and she saw under that the word found in a scrawl that bore no relationship to the careful letters above it. She watched the edges of that dog-esque flyer lean toward a paper beside it like it was conferring with a neighbor about boundary lines. Around this time, the manager began to misplace small necessary items, the driver bits, and the soft black pen that wrote on freezer paper, and the keys that opened boxes that should not have been locked. He was tired and wore tired on his face, like a bruise he tried to cover with a nice shirt. He asked Marla for help looking, and she helped with the efficient gestures she always used. She found the soft black pen under the board, which is not where pens roll, because the board's edge sits tight. She reached a hand under to sweep it out, and grazed the underside of the cork, and felt a delicate forest of nap against her knuckles, and drew back quickly, as if the nap had an opinion about her fingers. She said she found the pen on the floor. He thanked her with a look that was almost a flinch. The shelter lady came by everyone knew by sight but not by name. People said she had lots of names because a person's life gets braided to the work they do, and they are not precisely themselves anymore. She put a palm on the board the way Marla had done, like a person checking a forehead for fever, and she closed her eyes for one long moment and then said, without opening them, that the notes would keep coming, but would not matter. She said the thing had learned more than she could unlearn it from. She did not say the word thing. She said nothing there, like a door keeps out. Marla wanted to ask questions with numbers in them. How many? How much longer? How far? She pressed her lips together and asked instead, "What do you want from us?" The shelter lady opened her eyes and said, "To be small and to be kind." She said it with the voice of someone who has lost an argument and turned it into a principle. That evening the doors breathed louder than they had, and then went very quiet, like a person who has taught themselves not to snore. The silence was worse. In the quiet, the room listened back. A rack of greeting cards gave a pitying little tremble. A coin fell, though no one had touched a register. The board waited the way people wait when their names are about to be read in a roll call. It happened not drama, but an accumulation, as everything had. Wicket led her to the door just before she meant to go to bed and placed his paw on the wood as if to show her something about the grain. She set her palm above his paw and felt the rhythm of breath, and for the first time it matched hers perfectly, not faster, not slower. He kept his paw there and then turned his head toward her with a slowness that said, "Let us be careful how we speak, because words leave marks." She said his name in the soft tone she kept for him. He blinked, that slow blink you take to mean peace. He removed his paw and then set it back 1 inch to the left, exactly on a seam where two boards met and pressed. The seam widened almost imperceptibly, a difference you would not admit if you needed not to, and then the seam eased back. Wicket lifted his paw and looked at the seam and then at her, and in that look was the shape she had seen in the mirror. It was not a question, it was not an answer, it was a tilt toward a place names live. Marla slept in short lengths after that. She went to work and did the kind trades with customers and bagged for those who wanted help, and kept her voice steady to teach the air the shape of normal. She took down notices she could defend taking, and she eased the edges of those whose people could not yet let go. She watched children go to the board and reach up and touch a cat's face on glossy stock and pull their hands back when the paper sighed toward them. The manager stopped saying humidity and started saying a different nothing at all. The HVAC man did not come back. The board began to insist on something Marla could not name. It wanted not just names, but routes. She could tell because of the way the flyers that mentioned streets or corners or landmarks curled more belovedly than the ones that did not. Alley behind the row of houses in the little handwriting of someone who has not written much. Curl. Near the fence, where the old lilac condensed into a hedge. Curl. By the storm grate with the missing screw, a deep fold that hid a phone number and swallowed the lower dots of punctuation like seeds. She wanted to write to people as they stood with their pens, to tell them to say less, to say only the name, only the color, only the collar. She did not tell them. Wanting to take information out of one person's hand to save another is a kind of theft, even if you mean it right. She made herself put a finger down on a corner and hold it when writing went too thin, and when their hands shook, she moved her hand away. At the end of a long day, with far less of anything like answer than she needed, she went to the office and shut the door and sat at the desk and listened to the cooler, steady tick, a metronome for a band that does not come on stage. She drew the little receipt from the drawer where she had hidden it and wrote on the back the warning she wanted strangers to read. She had already said part of it to herself in the kitchen at night. She pressed the pen harder than a receipt likes, tore into the paper a little, and did not make the letters fancy. She kept her hand slow. When she had finished, she held the paper up near her face as if it might throw off a smell of danger. She nodded once at no one and went out to the board. The doors breathed. The board held itself very still, like a child playing statue. She taped the note beneath the header where once the manager had taped his joke. The tape caught, then thought, then settled. The board took no offense to the note. It did not curl toward it as it did toward names. It let it sit like a policy sign in a place that knows policy has the power of a paper crown. She felt it mattered anyway. Leave the warning in place for whoever would need a sentence they could carry home in a pocket and not explain to a husband. By then, the found signs outweighed the lost. People wore faces you see at a clinic that gives shots, a little resigned, a little proud of getting through, a little ready to be told they have been brave. The animals near the door waited and listened, listening in the way animals do when they are learning a car in the distance, learning footsteps, learning a person's old wallet snap. A woman stood and said to Marla, "The board knows," and Marla said, "Yes, because there is no point in arguing against a sentence like that with any other word." The day thinned out. The light went the way it goes when you can smell the dust under it, as if someone has shaken a rug far away. The manager did his rounds and went away from the office a minute at a time to pretend to do things elsewhere, and then returned to the office where his chair remembered him. On her way out, she paused by the mirror. The shape there held its head in that angle so known to her. She wanted to live in a different town with a different board, one that hosted pancake breakfasts and baby announcements with tiny footprints, a place where the cork stained over time with thumb oil and not with breath. She placed her finger on the glass and thought foolishly that if she said the names out of order, she could unteach what had been learned. She did not speak. She watched the shape watch her. They held there for a time that might have been a minute or half the evening. Then she turned away and made a square of the floor with her steps and stuck to the edges, as if the center of the store belonged to someone else now. At home, the door breathed as always. She stood with her shoulder against it and listened past the sound to the space beyond. She could hear a rustle that belonged to a hedge or a neighbor or wind, and she could also hear a listening that had nothing to do with weather. Wicket loped up, made the little chirp that melts you, and then sat and put his paw on the seam again. She set her hand above it. She set her other hand below it. The wood did not change in any visible way, but the breath through it shifted toward her hands, as though pulled by the heat of skin. Wicket kept his paw there until the breath pulled even, and then he removed it and walked away in a curve that showed he had learned the room again in a new order. She slept some. She woke to the sound of softly made decisions. She went to work and watched a boy she did not know place his face near the cork and whisper something, and she did not ask what, and the board did not answer aloud. And she let him go with a candy bar and a receipt he would roll in his hand till it was string. She took down a poster for a calico that had come home and placed it in the drawer with the gum where her own lived. She reached in and felt the edge of her paper and pulled it an inch and then put it back. And that motion felt like a game people play when they cannot afford to lose but want to feel the idea of gamble in the fingers for a second. A storm came through that the weather had promised and then done the proper thing of delivering. The rain banged on the metal over the back door like coins. The power dipped and returned and dipped and returned. The doors, on generator backup, chose to breathe on a longer schedule while the building spoke to the private weather it had made. The board darkened a shade, as if rain had reached it through an unseen route. In the middle of this, when the sound was loud enough to cover any small thing and make it into a big thing, a girl came and told Marla she had found her cat the way kids deliver grades they have earned. "Wicket," she said, in a voice that held pride and a secret. Marla smiled and said what she was supposed to say, and felt in her mouth the shape of agreeing. "Where?" she asked, though she had taught herself not to ask. "Under a table," said the girl with the broad gesture that means all tables belong to the same category in some other world. and his ear did a thing when he heard his name. The girl looked past Marla, over to the board, not to the photo, but to somewhere in the cork, where holes made a word. She put her tongue in her cheek and then bit it light, like people do when concentrating on not crying. "He knew me," she said, only she said it in a line that anyone in the store could hold and then use when they needed it. In the quieter after the rain, when the parking lot had that smell of heat leaving wet concrete, Marla cleaned as always. She changed the coffee filter, she wiped the belt on the register, she lifted the rug at the entry and looked where the marks lived. The 2 lines of neat twin rows had not moved much. Between them, more of the fine lines appeared, a greater number than the day before. So thin she could not say with authority what had made them. She put the rug down and wanted nothing other than to go home and sit on her couch with a plate and watch a thing on a screen that would make her imagine the world has edges. She locked up and did not look when the doors took their breath, and then she did, because the advice about not looking is meant for people who obey. She looked and saw only her own face in the glass, flanked by a few dogs who would have frightened anyone but who now were as ordinary as weather. Their tails were set as if their bodies were antennae. The last week of this felt like it might go on forever if no one named it an end. She went to the board and took down all the notices she had reason to, moving quietly, leaving in their places small squares of old cork that looked for a heartbeat like missing teeth. She pulled a tack that had bent into a joint and felt it soften under her thumb, like something with a few too many hinges. She put that tack in the trash and did not watch it. She smoothed a corner and felt the paper lean in and then fall back, apologizing. She posted one fresh lost and watched it bite as if the cork had a jaw. She wrote one more little warning on a blank square she cut from the edge of a carton and taped it under the first. When your pet comes home, do not open the door wide. It was not elegant. It was plain. Plain is how people like her talk when there is no reward for fancy. She turned and caught the mirror's skew on the board and saw, for a moment, the patient shape lean in too near. It had learned the store in a way that said the store had learned it back. For the first time since this started, she saw, in the glass, a very slight outline at the shoulder, where a person would be wide. Not fur, not cloth, something of a seam where breath meets its edge. The shape tilted its head, not like Wicket this time, but like a person whose neck has remembered a particular pillow for many years. She did not move. She thought of her house and the door, breath, and of the seam Wicket put his paw on. She thought of the lie round the block that nothing had changed. She thought of the old man who had asked after gaps and had done his duty by asking. She thought of the shelter lady saying to be small and kind. She did not think of any number. When she got home that evening, the air in her house stood still. She held still with it. Wicket approached the door and did not touch this time. He sat and folded his paws, a ceremony of waiting. She set her palm to the wood, and the wood did not breathe for a long while, so long she had to pull her hand away and press her fingers to her own face to believe in movement. Then it breathed in, slow and sorry, as if it wanted to admit something and could not find the words. She sat on the floor with her back to the door and let her head rest between her shoulders and felt the dust through her shirt and thought of the board with its mouths and its warmth and its devotion to names. She thought for the first time with the shape of conviction that everyone who had written a pet's name had a taste of responsibility, like salt on a tongue, hard to spit. She thought she should have done it different. She should have kept quiet. She should have scrawled nothing on any receipt. She should have folded every flyer the moment she saw it and slid it in a drawer and locked the drawer and thrown the key in the river. Then she thought of the way people needed a place to put something. She thought of how love looks like the quick note in the corner that says answers to Daisy, and of how you cannot steal that from people without putting something muddier in its place. It did not end with any closing of a gate. The board did not explode or bleed or grow. It very slowly, likely always would be what it had become. The town adjusted the way towns do. They stopped putting up posters as often. They whispered more at counters and less in print. The dogs learned to sit a foot farther back from the line where the mat ends. The cats moved their tails in a code that meant more to them than to anyone. The shelter lady showed up and took down a handful of old notices without asking and slid them into her bag. Her shoulders dropped when she did. It looked like she had put a weight on, and the weight pleased her. When Marla passed the mirror, she lifted her hand and widened her fingers and left a palm print, and then wiped it off with her sleeve. She let herself count a single time, not aloud, the way the breath went in and out of the doors. And when she caught herself counting a second, she stopped and hummed a tune instead, without a rhythm to it. She brought Wicket into work one morning early, when no one would be there, because she wanted to test a thing she hated to want to test. She carried him in the carrier with the door shut and set it on the courtesy desk while she did the coffee and tills and watched the doors breathe. He did not make a sound. He watched the board, and the board did not move. She carried him down aisle 3 and looked in the mirror and saw both of them in the skew, her face long with tired and his face held, and behind them the patient shape lifted its head that fraction and then rested it again as if to say it could wait forever. She took him back to the desk and kissed the top of his head through the carrier and carried him out. The dogs did not move for him. The cats watched him in the way people watch a neighbor move away and wonder if the house will sell. If there was a change, it came small and was next to invisible. People took to walking around the block before opening their front doors that first day after a found notice, as if to see their house from every angle would help. Children started spelling their pets' names aloud in the kitchen as a game, and the game turned to a rule about how you do not play that game after supper. Someone with a printer made a stack of blank green slips that said, "Please remove notices when your pet returns, thank you," and set them on the counter in a cut glass dish and left a note that said, "Take one." The slips did not curl and did not bite. They went home quietly in pockets and did what they could. Marla carried on as if carrying on were a job you could clock in for. She left fresh tape and tacks in the paper cup because you cannot make order without helping tools. She taped another warning beneath the first when the first got curled and grey and tired. She wrote new warnings now and then in her own hand and stood looking at them until the words forgot what they meant and became only black shapes. She pulled notices from the edges inward, not because it mattered, but because it soothed, like smoothing bed covers. Here is the truth she had not let into her mouth before. She did not want to fight the board. She did not want to save the town. She wanted to keep the lights going and the coffee hot and the floor clean, and names from being taken more than they needed to be. She wanted to get to the end of a day and put her hand on the door at home and not feel a breath that wanted to keep time with hers. Sometimes she stood at the board and spoke to it, wise enough to do it without moving her lips. She said, "They love them." She said, "We are trying." She said, "Count kindly." The cork held warmth and the paper edges made their little leaning. She thanked the board once for letting her take hers down. She asked it to let her keep the address out of its mouth. She told it if it wanted to know the way to her house, it already knew. She said to it that she would be small and kind. She said it quietly. She spoke like someone who knows a thing can learn. Wicket made his rounds. He kept his peculiar attention to seams. He stopped placing a paw on the door after a while and instead sat with his back against it, as if his body could assign a boundary. He slept in the old place on the pillow one night and purred in a way that did not include any other sound. She cried once then, not because he had returned, but because for a half hour he weighted the inside of the world toward the place where love is, and the breath of the door did not count. There were days she thought about moving. The thought made a sound like a drawer sliding in a cupboard that has not been opened in a while, She imagined another store that sold the same things with different faces buying them, a board that offered guitar lessons and bake sales, and an honest lost mitten. She imagined herself in the same smock and same sneakers, and that soothed. She imagined moving, and then remembered that you do not leave something like this behind. It finds its own path, it learns names and routes, and becomes a district more than a building. She stayed because staying felt less like trying to escape, and more like trying to be correct. A week slid into another, and the story of it across town went from emergency to habit, which is how people survive anything. A spate of new notices, then a flurry of found, then a lull. The doors breathed and the breath became a punctuation no one mentioned, like the fan that clicks in the corner of a church basement during another funeral lunch. The board filled and emptied with a tide that nobody charted. The HVAC man never returned with his testing device. The manager bought primer and then did not open the can. He gave up saying words like humidity. He cut open a box with a tape blade and stared at his hands, and then put the blade down very gently and stepped away, as if it were hot. And Marla understood, without asking, that the metal disturbed him not because of its edge, but because of its faint sweetness in a room that had learned a palate. She took down her own final whisper when the paper turned into a felt of handling. She wrote the warning cleaner on a fresh square and put it under the header. The tape made that small breath sound as it stuck. The board ignored the warning with polite patience, the way you ignore the grumpy man who tells the room how to behave and then leaves early. She left the warning anyway. It mattered to her. It could matter to one other person, which is, in math, you do with your heart, a kind of plenty. Sometimes at night the house did more than breathe. It made a soft sound of inventory, as if counting its doors and windows and the slots where light pushes in. She did not stand up to look. She looked at the ceiling and whispered Wicket's name and did not say it again. He came and settled and did the slow bread-making that had always made her laugh, and she did not laugh. She let the rhythm stand. In the mirror at the store, the shape committed to nothing new. It waited and watched and learned, and in the learning taught. Marla went on, being exactly as brave as the day required, and then no more. If anyone asked her for a point to all this, she would not offer one. Points are for speeches and sales. A life is made of chores and a line you write when your hand shakes. On a quiet morning, months later, a child came in carrying a flyer with a fresh photo, and his mother's hand hovered above his as if she could help without touching. The child reached up, and the tack went in easily, and when he pulled his fingers back, the paper did that thing now, and leaned and read, ready to know the name. Marla stood near and nodded, and when the child stepped away, she moved a hair's breadth closer and shifted the paper a fraction left, because it would catch less breeze that way and fray less. She counted the tacks she could, not aloud. She kept the warning under the header and put fresh tape on its corners when the edges curled, and after close, when the doors drew in all at once, and then let the night out the same. She did not look. She locked and moved through the dark quiet behind the building and did not turn to see whatever watched. She drove home with the window down a crack and the sound of the tires making a sighing like the breath of a door. Before she went to sleep, she stood in the hall with the light off and put her hand on the wood and let it breathe under her palm. The seam was where it always been. She spoke, and because there is a way you say sentences when you do not want them to change, she said them plain. If your notice is up, take it down. If your pet comes home, count the tracks, do not open wide. When the doors breathe after hours, do not look. Then, because she knew the board had learned Wicket and would not unlearn it, she said the name once and not again. And then she lay down and closed her eyes and let the house keep time without her. In the morning, she would unlock and light and till and coffee and scrape stray tape and smooth edges and pull the papers that needed pulling and add the ones that comforted and she would do it knowing the thing beside the bathrooms, with the patience of a country road, would hold her work the way the land holds a fence that has learned into it. She would keep her own copy of his face in the drawer under the gum, as if where it lived could make any difference. She would walk past the mirror and pretend to forget, and then remember, and catch the tilt, and see in that tilt the love she could not unteach the world. She would hope, against all available sense, that whoever found him in the first place would misplace the path they took to her address and wake one night without the map. She would hope, like a person stocking soup, like a person easing tape flat with the side of a thumb, like a person listening to compressors. She would straighten and breathe and let the board keep its names and go on. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more content. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Feel free to leave a comment below with your thoughts or questions. I love hearing from you. Until next time, take care and stay awesome.